if I set this up right, I should be able to look thoughtful, wise, spiritual, unfazed by the sticks under my feet, because I'm so relaxed, so grounded, and so non-attached that like a little bit of stick and stone pain or an ant bite couldn't possibly faze me, because if it did, I wouldn't be very enlightened. So I'm under a tree, kind of like Isaac Newton. I'd imagine the Buddha lecturing from under a tree. And I'm not going to look directly at you, because if I look directly at you, then we're on the same level. And I'm meant to be slightly above, because I'm the spiritual guru and I have a YouTube channel and you're just a measly YouTube watcher. All right, so what I really want to talk to you guys about is the relationship between body and mind. This is a really interesting topic because we can both see them as connected and disconnected. Body and mind are connected in that your experience of being you doesn't get filtered into physical and mental categories before you feel it. So they're one. You have one whole experience. But there's definitely some kind of movement, bidirectional movement, between body and mind, and there's definitely some kind of interplay that creates your experience. And we know that because when you change something about your physiology, the content of your mind also shifts. And when you change something about your state of mind or psychology, the state of your body can shift. So we can work with both, and some people seem to have a preference, some people seem to have a proclivity or like a tendency to work with their body or work with their mind more. Like we have people who are more feelers and tactile and expressive in this way, and then we have people who are more kind of intellectual. How you going? How you going? So like dogs are a perfect example of just the really embodied, feeling, processing through movement. And then we have like an academic who's like very much up here. So the way your psychology interprets the sensations that your body is feeding creates a certain reaction or perspective about those sensations. And those sensations are then experienced in a different way from if the psychology was different. So when you change your mind, you change the way you experience your body. When you change your body, you're also shifting the nature of the raw material that your mind is getting. So the same mental or psychological systems, templates, ways of thinking, belief structures are being fed different raw info. Or you could even say different triggers, different physiological triggers. Certain sensations or physiological bodily experiences will trigger certain thought patterns, beliefs, templates, programs. Because our experiences through memory are sorted and filed in the body. So like there's a record of something that happens here and the interpretation we make of it and the belief and the snapshot of what we saw, what we heard and all of that. And there's also the state we were in and our body state, and that's all part of the memory. So memory forms a really important part of the body-mind relationship. And emotion is the charge, the emotional charge, the strength of the emotion is often what seems to consolidate that memory and to make it memorable in the first place. When I say emotion, just to be clear, energy in motion really is just a cool way to talk about it. So emotion doesn't have to be the thing that you label as happiness or anger or sadness or whatever. Emotion can be energy moving through the body. And even when you think about what happiness or sadness or joy are, they're interpretations of particular types of energy movement in the body. So some emotions are associated with like a heat in the chest or the belly. Others are associated with a heat in the head or a coldness in certain areas. And if we were to map a body, then the places that light up and the places that go cold and the places the energy is moving to and whether there's a contraction or a pressure or an expansion, that is what tells our mind, so to speak, or our brain, what emotion we're having. And then we label it. Like anger has a certain feeling. Anger has a certain energy movement. Anger has a certain biochemistry or neurochemistry. It has a certain somatic or bodily experience. There is a physical map of the anger experience. And then there's the label of anger and all of the thoughts we have about anger, which help us to identify that physical map as anger. So you have what's coming up from the body, the energy that's moving, the feeling, and then you have the interpretation of that feeling in the mind. And there can be this interesting relationship there, which we're going to talk about a bit more. An emotion, so body, emotion, mind. Emotion is like the channel or the gate between the two, that it's like almost a diagnostic or feedback process to help us orient ourselves in the world, how we act, how we respond, what we should move towards, what we should move away from, how to remember certain things, how to not just have a memory, but how to have a sense of meaning in the memory, like a sense of importance. So in between the two, you've got emotion, and emotion on the more intellectual or psychological side are those labels, like let's say anger, sorrow, whatever. And on the more somatic side, it's just like heat, cold, high, low, scattery, collected. So it's very almost scientific, like it's raw info, it's sensation. So we have body, sensation type of emotion, and then we have the kind of label and judgment type of emotion, which comes from the mind. So the mind is making a judgment of the sensation to label the emotion, and depending on the mind's judgment of the sensation, there's often this sense of positive or negative, good or bad. And this is where we have to be kind of careful. This is where things get really interesting. The value judgments that we make about our emotions have a lot to do with how we will relate to other people and how we're going to respond to stresses in our life, stressors and stresses, whatever. So if you see anger as bad, not good, undesirable, then you're going to try to move away from your anger when you feel it. So there'll be a certain trigger, an experience, a button pushed somehow in your life that will bring up the set of physical sensations, somatic experiences, movements of heat and energy, neurochemistry that we call anger. And then depending on how you feel about anger and what you've been taught about the expression of anger, you will then judge the anger. Good, bad, move towards, move away. So then we have emotional reactivity. So the emotion is the info that's coming up from the body, or the trigger, or the interpretation. It's happening quickly, it's happening unconsciously. And then we have the interpretation of that anger, let's say, as good, bad, whatever. The reaction happens because of the interpretation, not just because of the bodily experience. There's layers of reaction. So emotional reactivity, as opposed to just emotion, is feeling that set of sensations, feeling that emotion, and then having a judgment of it. And the judgment creates a kind of charge or conflict in the body. And that charge or conflict intensifies that emotion. And it shifts the body's state into like a different level of arousal. You can be afraid of your own anger. You can be sort of activated, or you can be depressed, depleted. So the anger itself and the color and the sensation of that then has a secondary reaction. So what can happen is you react to your reaction, to your reaction, to your reaction, and that's emotional reactivity. When you can just feel something and you don't make a judgment of it mentally, when you don't condemn yourself for any experience, when you're simply able to witness the experience arising in whatever way it arises, then you're not adding any reactivity. You're not reacting to your reactions. And when you're not adding reactivity, it enables that emotion, that energy in motion, or that biochemical process to pass more quickly and shift more quickly without you telling a story and getting all hung up. Without you putting yourself in a need to move away from or move towards the emotion kind of dynamic. It's there. It can just be, it is. It just is, like weather, like a tree, like a leaf, whatever. It's just like an element of life. Scientific, artistic, it's material. When it's material, it changes quickly. Most emotions, I don't know where this came from, but it rings true. Most emotions pass in around 90 seconds, okay? There's an initial trigger, an emotional reaction in the body, and that's actually like a biochemical reaction. But then it passes, it's served its purpose, it's informed us through memory about the meaning of that experience, and then it goes. But it's when we resist this and when we try to judge or command our emotional experience to change, or we try to get away from it, that we run into trouble. Because how can you get away from an experience that's happening in your body? You can't. Where would you go? Aha. So now we have dissociation. You can dissociate from an experience that's happening in your body. How does this happen? How do you get away from an experience that's happening in your body? Well, it's a form of denial. It's a form of protective mechanism that the psyche has to help you exist in a different compartment of your experience where you feel safely separate from the bodily experience. The downside of dissociation is you no longer have access to the full range of information that's being presented to you. The upside of dissociation is the ability to continue functioning at a certain level. When you can continue functioning at a certain level, there's a chance that you'll mitigate further damage to yourself. There's a chance that you'll be able to continue to get energy and get resources and support yourself. So dissociation is not something which serves no purpose. However, dissociation brings with it this issue of numbness, this issue of separation between the experience your body is having, and the experience you perceive yourself to be having. And so the body and the self become separate. The body and the self can only be separate in the mind, in the experience. And this is really interesting. This is where we look at things like chronic disease. We look at things like injuries that won't heal. We have this estrangement from the ground of our being, the elemental part of our being. So it's like we're existing in a psychological room separate from our body. This means that we don't understand we're having certain experiences when we're having them. We don't understand we're having certain reactions. We don't understand the effects that certain situations or triggers or environmental exposures are having upon us, because we've numbed that communication channel. We've exited that emotional pathway. So dissociation is really a response to there being too much energy in motion, aka emotion, for us to be able to process. Usually it's impossible to process this thing because the mind has a particular worldview that it's used to, which corresponds with a set of feelings in the body. And for some reason, something happens in life which rocks that worldview to such an extent that the connection between body and mind are fractured. Now, the connection between body and mind it's always being slightly fractured. It's always being stretched. Whenever we go into imagination, whenever we go into sometimes even or like any kind of storytelling or identity forming dialogue or thought process about life, we're kind of disconnecting from a certain aspect of our experience in order to be able to connect more with that other aspect. So the issue really is when your story doesn't match your embodied experience. And in that split, we get self-sabotage, okay? So self-sabotage is what happens when your story about who you are and what you need and what you want doesn't match the need that your body is communicating. So you have a direction which your ego or your sense of self, your psyche, wants to go in, and it wants to go in that direction probably to access some kind of validation, some kind of connection, some kind of belonging, some kind of energy and safety. But the direction that it's trying to go in is not informed by what the platform of the body actually needs. And so it's like you've got this driver in a spaceship, which is the human body, and the driver is trying to go somewhere even though the spaceship isn't necessarily prepared. Maybe there's not enough fuel. Maybe there's a warning light on the dashboard that's being ignored or turned off through dissociation or an other numbing mechanism. Sometimes it's, like pharmaceuticals. There's a number of different ways we can dissociate, but that's what's happening, okay? There's a breakdown in communication between the layer of body and the layer of mind. When there's a breakdown between these layers, there's also a breakdown between the layers of the unconscious and the conscious. Or you can kind of use the term subconscious and conscious. So you have an intelligence, and if we define intelligence as the ability to adapt to change, the ability to actually respond and shift after something happens, and to do that in a way which seems to denote learning or information integration. So if intelligence is the ability to adapt to change and to integrate new information, then your body is intelligent too. Your subconscious is intelligent too. It's not just the part of you that's cognitively, intellectually functioning. It's also the things that you don't understand about yourself. Those things are also intelligent. Your body has an intelligence in that, when you eat an apple, you ingest, you digest, you sort of assimilate and metabolize, and then you eliminate. There's a whole process of information which is coming in the form of it's elemental information. An apple is made up of certain elements, certain compounds, whatever, it's chemical information. And that information, that nutritional information, the energy information of the apple, comes into the body and is processed, and then is assimilated and eliminated. That is an intelligent process. It's just not a cognitive process. So we have intelligence at the subconscious and unconscious levels because we're not actively doing that, right? That's an autonomic function. It's happening without our doing. It's happening through us. It is life living us, and our sense of self exists within this unconscious intelligence, which we call the body, which we can even extend to include things that are outside of the human body but which affect the body. If an apple affects the body enough to nourish us to some degree, then the earth also affects the body to some degree, and so does the sunlight, and so does the barometric pressure, and so does everything we're exposed to. The macrobiome, the microbiome, gut-brain connection. So there's this constant feeding of intelligent process through us, and we're only conscious of the tip of the iceberg of that process. So what this means is you have multiple types of intelligence, some of which you can't see. Now we often, in our hubris is like grandiosity, it's like assumption of superiority, it's like this almost intellectual arrogance. We often devalue the intelligence which is subconscious and unconscious. And people can argue about whether intelligence can be unconscious, but I hope you're getting I hope you're understanding the point I'm trying to make. There's this wonderful order that's happening that we're not actively doing. It's autonomic. So we downplay that because we seem to have this respect for everything above that we can see in the light. And Western modern culture is like, let's always leave the lights on in the shops at night. Let's make sure we can always see. Let's have more information. More information, more information, more information, more. But it's not making its way into the soil of our beings. We're not integrating very well. And with the advent of newer technology, I don't know if advent's the right word, but we have even more information and even more options. But how many of these options can we know are good for us? How can we know these options are good for us if we are dissociated from our body, if we're not able to feel the fullness of our emotion, if we're discarding the mass of information and wisdom that's coming from beneath conscious awareness, in that part of the iceberg we can't see, which forms so much of how and why we act and how we function. So there's this little tip of the iceberg we can see, and that's the conscious mind. That's the egoic self. That's the idea of who you are. And these are your conscious expectations and your conscious desires and the things that you think you want and the things that you think you need. And that's the level we try to solve so many problems at. And in the healing world, it's quite difficult because sometimes we can add so much to an already incredibly complex biological and ecological process that we end up complicating that process, and it's like touching buttons on a phone that we don't fully understand, but thinking, yeah, I got it, I get it, I get it. You might understand part of it, but you can never see the flow-on effects of what you're doing when you're tinkering with something that is that complex, a system that is that complex. So runaway consciousness is this dissociative consciousness which is not embodied and grounded. Runaway consciousness is this type of consciousness which humans seem to get lost in, which seeks to get away from what is naturally occurring. We don't want pain. We don't want emotion. We don't want anything that we've deemed to be bad. Death is deemed as bad. Not knowing is often deemed as bad. I mean, obviously, if you're fucking smart, you know that you need to not know in order to learn. But we kind of forget this underworld process. We forget the process of automatic digestion and integration, which is what happens when you let things be for a while. When you let yourself have a season of not ingesting more, consuming more. The consumption culture is a big part of this. Artificial needs created to trick human beings into thinking that they're not going to be safe unless they buy a product, that they're not going to be fulfilled unless they buy a product. And there's a lot of manipulation. And this manipulation occurs in the world and is internalized, and we learn to do it to ourselves. So we're brainwashed externally and we learn to kid ourselves. And that is all possible because of that split between body and mind, which is our fear of our own emotional process. And the emotional process is what we fear most about death. It's what we fear most about all of the things that we run from. It's actually the emotional process, the energy in motion through the body. Pain can be seen as on the very bodily, very unconscious end of the emotional process spectrum. Suffering and emotional pain rather than physical pain is a bit closer to the sort of psyche end of the spectrum. So some things are parts of life, right? Like pain, degeneration of the tissues and body, it's all part of life. But the reaction to that and the emotion about that and thinking that that is somehow wrong and that's not meant to be part of how things work, that's a value judgment. That's a culturally conditioned value judgment. That is something we've learned to believe, because pain in and of itself is just a guide. It's information. It may be hard for a lot of people listening to this to get on board with the way that I see things here. Oh, well, of course pain's bad. Of course you want to fix it. We need the presence of pain before we can redirect our actions, right? So a lot of people try to fix it too quickly. They don't want to listen first. It's like trying to shortcut a conversation. The more deeply we can lean into a conversation and curiosity and humility in the face of our human experience, our physiological experience, our emotional experience, the more we can learn. The more we can learn about what we are, who we are, why we're here, and how others are feeling. The deeper and more profoundly we can access that raw human information, the more we tend to see how everything fits together. Because no process occurring in your body exists without a trigger in the environment. And that's really fucking important. So we live in this world where there's this, like, we want to make these clean-cut delineations between me and you, body and mind, environment and self. But as Alan Watts says when he uses the term organism environment, we can't make these clean-cut delineations. We can use definitions to talk about things, and we can absolutely demarcate certain things, and it's important in any learning and intellectual process to be able to differentiate between things. Like, I need to know that a tiger is different from a fucking soup spoon, right? But in terms of what causes effects, what causes things to happen, that is where we need to look more at the continuity and connection between body, mind, environment. And so when we're healing something, what we're often doing is we're working with the nervous system. Like most issues in the body, pain, illness, all of this, there's a continuum of reactions and things that are happening within that illness, right? Symptoms and causes. And they exist on a continuum, and no system heals or is injured alone, ever. Okay? They all affect one another because everything that exists is in relationship with everything else. It's called interdependence. There is a co-arising of certain factors. Things happen together, and there's a certain linkage between those factors. The way you think affects the way you feel. The way you feel, if you repetitively feel that way, affects your body, because a feeling is a biochemical experience. So certain thoughts can create repetitive biochemistry, which has an effect on the body's inflammation and healing, and it goes the other way too. Everything is connected. So when we're looking at causality and how to understand pain and illness and how to heal things, we need to look at every layer, because every layer is just as formative and just as important. It truly is. And Gary Vaynerchuk says, content is king, but context is God. So if you need help and I give you a paperclip, but what you're trying to do is build a footbridge, then I gave you some content, I gave you a thing, and I might think paperclips are fucking amazing, right? And I might have invented this special paperclip that does all these different things. But if it doesn't fit the context of what you actually need, that paperclip is kind of useless in that moment. In the same way, if we don't understand the body's context, if we're not connected to our own experience, and we're always the best ones at being connected to the entirety of our experience, then how can we know what content to bring in? If you're purely trying to base your responses to your body and your body's needs on what other people have done to respond to their body's needs in a different context, then you're always going to be trying to follow the content, not the context. You need to get in touch with the context. And here's the interesting thing. When you get really in touch with the context, your body knows what to do about the content more than you realize. A simple example of this, you could get in cold water and you could dissociate and you could try and avoid the cold water and you could try to tell yourself it's not cold. You can do all these things with your mind, right? But what if you go in and you just allow yourself to fully embrace the cold and feel what is happening without labeling as much as possible? Well, more of that experience would be processed more quickly through you, and your body would therefore respond to the cold via a natural biological process based on the receptors and all of the shit that's happening in there, and you'd start to warm up more quickly than if you spent all of that extra energy that you could have spent warming up trying to calculate things cognitively that don't need to be dealt with in the mind. The physiology knows what to do about physical things when experience is accepted. Another great example of this is horse stance. When you dive deep into a deep squat, right, and you're hanging out, your legs are heating up and you're gripping your muscles, a lot of people freak out and they don't want to feel the pain. They're emotionally reactive to the pain. We all are to a degree, but it's a skill. You can become less reactive, more responsive. You can become able to be with experiences as they are without telling stories and without running away out of fear. You let the fear dissolve and you see what's left. The pain, it's there and you sit with it and the emotions start to release and dissipate and the body shakes and then the pain starts to actually minimize and your body starts to function better and you're able to hold that difficult position more comfortably just through a change in how you're relating to the experience. So when you let things come through you, when you let the nervous system process information, everything responds. It responds autonomically. Carl Rogers said, I think I'm going to misquote it, but in a nervous system that is open to experience, stimulus is able to flow through freely without any process of distortion. Okay, I definitely got that a little bit wrong. But in a nervous system that is open to experience, stimulus is able to flow through freely without any process of distortion. So you're getting pure information, clear information, accurate information, real-time information through your body. You're not interfering with that transmission of information by coming in and planting thoughts and judgments and complications and extra reactions to then have to be processed. And so what happens to us is we get locked in psychological time because we're reacting to our experience. The psychology gets stuck because it's trying to understand, grip, apprehend, form a judgment, but that judgment can never be fully formed and completed at the rate that life is passing through. Life and presence is occurring at a rate of immense development, immense complexity, and there's immense amounts of information that are happening which our psychological filters end up catching, removing parts from, and giving us a small part of to be conscious of, because we can't be conscious of everything and still function. So the psychological filters need to be updated and cleaned, basically, just like a car filter. And if you're not updating the psychological filters often enough, then what ends up happening is you're using a filter which is made for the past, and the body's experience is being filtered through a past memory, and you're not getting what's present. And so you can't respond properly in attunement and harmony with the world around you. This is why psychedelics is so useful. I'm just going to check that this hasn't stopped recording, because if it has, oh fuck yeah, we're still going. All right, psychedelics can be so useful because they can open up the neural filters and they can open up the weave of these interpretive pathways. So they enable you to update your psychological operating system to function more fluidly and efficiently with the present moment. You become free. You're not locked in your past conditioning anymore. The downside of psychedelic experiences can be that the neural filters can become so open that there is a destabilization of the psyche. And the psyche needs to be destabilized early and often, but when it comes in a massive whack, a massive hit, and you start to doubt your reality and you've seen something profound, but then you go back into the same conditions which led you to form the filter in the first place, that you just broke apart through the psychedelic experience, that then creates an issue because you've lost your ability to function adequately in the environment you were in. So there's a sweet spot where we need to sort of soften. It's like microdermabrasion, or it's like shaving off a callus, or exfoliating our neural filters to enable us to catch up to the present, to enable our thoughts and beliefs and ego to catch up with the present, because consciousness is presence. And if we try to rush that process, then the destabilization that occurs in the mind also affects the body, because it's two-way. Your thoughts and feelings affect your biology affects your thoughts and feelings. Thoughts and feelings move very quickly. Thoughts and feelings are quite important in how we're communicating with people socially, and how we're doing our work, and how we're functioning in society. And a great portion of what allows our bodies to feel safe is our level of connection with society, or our sense of connection with the world. But when we're used to connecting with the world through a certain filter of thoughts and beliefs and conditioning, and you change that, then your connection with the world fundamentally shifts, which is going to put the body into a state of overdrive to try and figure out what the fuck, like where the fuck all that energy is now going, and how to repair and how to orient itself, how to find homeostasis. The body wants to be stable while also ready to respond. Life is always changing. Our stability comes from our ability to respond well. And when you suddenly introduce a shit ton more information, and you remove the filters and you pull off the veil of the psyche, that's a very complex process. Like, there's a lot that you're revealing that then has to be filtered. It's like eating 1,000 apples at once and having to digest them all. Okay, so you can go to these amazing places, but can you come back and function healthily in society? Because it is an important aspect of your health. Very, very important. So that, I think, is what I will leave you with today. To sum up, you have body and you have the physical experience, which is obviously very connected to the environment. And your body doesn't delineate really between itself and the environment. There's just this sensing and feeling. There's this like nervous system tentacles, like tree roots, feeling the world's coming in. That's your body. Through the emotional process, it's connecting with the mind, the psyche. When I talk about mind in this context, I'm talking about psyche. Our conditioning, our sense of self, our ego, the way we rationalize. And so that rationalization of the raw experience creates a certain meeting, and that is the emotion. The emotion is how that really raw info becomes filtered into guidance for future behavior, and it's how that info gets saved in the memory so that we can know how to respond more efficiently in future by coming up with certain rules and rules of thumb, schema, certain generalized interpretations of the world that help us to not have to process everything at once. So we have these neural filters in these conditions in our psyche that help us connect with the social and egoic aspect of ourselves, our sense of self. And then we have the material that's informing that sense, and the emotions are in the middle. And the more we accept things that come up, the more quickly we can update our neural filters and stay in touch with our body. The more we judge the experiences that are coming up as being wrong or not having a place or they shouldn't be here, the more we separate ourselves from unconditional presence and the intelligent information feed that comes with that. The cost of dissociating, the cost of that judgment, the cost of not being able to accept what is a loss of communication with the natural world, including our bodies. The benefit of that dissociation is the ability to keep functioning in the social world with other humans and have some level of care, love, belonging, safety, validation. So our sense of self is here and the substance of self is here. They do connect. but there is play in our sense of self and a little bit of play in our substance of self too. And it goes both ways, like a figure of 8, of mind feeding body, body feeding mind. And it's an updating process that helps us remain socially connected and have an experience of a Jack, a Sarah, or whatever, while also having an experience of isness. When you're healing the body, you need to look at both, because any input at any point in that figure of 8 between mind and body is going to have flow and effects to the other aspects. And so any entry point that you have, whether you're working with belief systems, whether you're working with social systems, whether you're working with like the gut, whether you're working with the musculoskeletal system, the lymphatic system, the respiratory system, any system that you can work with to support is going to create downstream benefits, because no system gets sick alone or heals alone. So the holistic view is not a watered down, washed out view. It's a view which makes sure that you always have an entry point towards healing and evolution. No matter where you get stuck, you're going to be able to find a way to compensate. And in compensating, you're going to find a way to have enough energy to then let certain things rest and repair. I compensate if I break one leg by hopping on the other leg until that leg can weight bear. And then I have the energy being redistributed. I can start to gradually weight bear. Thank God I could compensate. Thank God I had another leg to keep functioning. So any way you can support yourself is fucking fantastic. And this is really important, because now we can get away from the fear mongering of like, oh no, don't do that, that's wrong, don't do that, that's wrong. Enjoy and appreciate anything you can possibly enjoy and appreciate about this life, because it's all going to help you and it's all going to inform your future experience. Don't be afraid of accumulating experience. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. There are no mistakes, there's just more information. If you can open to experience fully, then you're not distorting reality with conditioned delusion, and you're helping to update your body, update your mind, and actually update the social ecosphere as well. Help us as a collective update our consciousness and stay in connection with what's real, and not just all go psychotic, not all be disconnected from our bodies. All right. Much love.